Dad said, "No expensive gifts this Christmas," while my sister sat there opening a brand new iPhone, a designer purse worth more than my monthly rent, and a diamond bracelet that caught the light every time she moved her hand. I was sitting 3 feet away from her with nothing in front of me. No box, no envelope. Not even one of those fake little joke gifts my family used when they forgot birthdays. Just an empty spot on the table. I looked at my mom first because I honestly thought maybe they were waiting. Maybe there was something coming later. Maybe they wanted to surprise me after dinner. My sister was still smiling while she peeled the plastic off the iPhone screen. That was when I asked it. "What about me?" My mother slapped me before the last word fully came out. The sound cracked across the dining room so loudly that even my little cousin stopped chewing. Everything went quiet after that. My sister froze with the phone still in her hand. My dad stared down at his plate like the mashed potatoes suddenly became the most important thing in the world. My aunt opened her purse and pretended to look for something. My uncle cleared his throat and reached for another dinner roll. Nobody said a thing. Not one person at that table defended me. I didn't cry. That was the strange part. I thought I would. Instead, I stood up slowly, grabbed my coat off the back of the chair, and walked toward the front door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even called my name. The only sound behind me was my sister quietly asking if the phone needed to charge before setup. Every comfortable thing in that house existed because of me. The Netflix account, the Hulu subscription, the Amazon account my mom used every single week to order groceries and random junk she forgot she bought 2 days later. The Spotify family plan my sister blasted through the walls at midnight. The phone plan, all 4 lines, including the brand new iPhone she was holding in her lap with that huge smile on her face. I walked across the hallway toward the door. The hardwood floor creaked under the second step like it always did. I reached for the handle. Cold air rushed inside the second I opened the door. I stepped outside and closed it gently behind me. The click of the lock sounded cleaner than anything else I'd heard all night. The front yard gate was hanging halfway open because nobody in my family ever remembered to shut it. The street was wet from rain earlier that afternoon. Leaves stuck to the curb under the streetlights. I kept walking until I reached the corner. My cheek still burned from the slap, but the cold air helped numb it. I tightened my coat around myself and stopped beside a telephone pole to button it properly. That was when I decided exactly what I was going to do. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber. Not to my parents' house, to my apartment. The apartment none of them knew existed. I'd signed the lease 14 months earlier and never told them. I paid for it myself. Sometimes I stayed there on weekends while my family thought I was sleeping over at friends' places. The walls were plain white. The couch was cheap. The bedroom only had 1 lamp because I still hadn't bought another one. But every key to that place belonged only to me. The Uber driver arrived 6 minutes later. Older guy. Quiet. He asked if I wanted music. I told him no. He turned on the radio anyway, low enough that I could barely hear it. Some late-night sports station. I leaned my head against the cold window while we drove through downtown. Christmas lights hung between the street poles. Half of them were burned out. Nobody had bothered fixing them. I kept thinking about my sister opening the iPhone box. That exact smile she always made whenever somebody handed her something expensive. I'd seen it my whole life. Birthdays, graduations, random Tuesdays, didn't matter. My mother always found a reason to spoil her. I thought about the slap, about the sound, about the way nobody at the table even looked uncomfortable for more than 2 seconds. I still didn't cry. Mostly, I just felt tired. The Uber stopped outside my building 20 minutes later. I thanked the driver and went inside. The night security guy behind the desk was half asleep watching basketball highlights on his phone. He glanced up and wished me a Merry Christmas. I told him the same thing back. Then I took the stairs to the 4th floor because I hated elevators late at night when the building was empty. My apartment smelled closed up when I walked in. I turned on the kitchen light, dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl beside the counter, filled a glass with water and drank the whole thing without stopping. Then I poured another one and carried it to my desk. I opened my laptop. While it booted up, I set water on the stove for tea. Then I grabbed a fresh notebook from the drawer beside my desk. Dark blue cover. Unused. I wrote the date in the top corner of the first page. Then I started making a list. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Spotify family, Verizon family plan, 4 lines. Emily's new iPhone payment plan, Apple Music, shared iCloud storage, HBO Max, Disney Plus, YouTube Premium, Emily's gym membership, Dad's car insurance, gas and electric bills connected to my card, Walmart account with my payment info saved. I stopped for a second, then added 2 more. DoorDash and Uber Eats, Mom's wholesale grocery membership. I stared at the list. 17 things. 17 things they used constantly without ever thinking about who paid for them. The kettle started whistling. I poured the water into a mug and let the tea sit while I opened the first website. I started with the grocery membership. Cancellation page. The website offered me discounts 3 different times to stay. I declined everyone. Confirmation email arrived 12 seconds later. I created a new folder in my inbox called December and saved it there. Next came the food delivery apps. I removed my cards from both accounts, logged out from every device, changed the passwords anyway, then Amazon. I deleted my parents' address from the account. It was the default shipping address because my sister ordered something almost every weekend. I kept the account itself. I planned on using it. Disney Plus next. Cancelled. HBO. Cancelled. Hulu. Cancelled. Amazon Prime. Cancelled. YouTube Premium. Cancelled. Apple Music. Cancelled. Then Spotify. The one my sister played loud enough for me to hear through the walls almost every night growing up. The app asked if I was sure. I clicked yes. The app warned me my family would lose access at the end of the billing cycle. I clicked yes again. I took a sip of tea, burned my tongue a little. Then I opened Netflix. 5 profiles stared back at me. Mine, Mom's, Dad's, Emily's, and one profile called Family Room that nobody had ever actually used. I canceled the subscription. The website asked why. I selected no longer needed, then confirmed it. I leaned back in my chair afterward and stared at the screen for a few seconds. Not because I felt guilty, mostly because I felt calm for the first time all night. Then I opened the Verizon account. The full cancellation needed paperwork, but temporary suspension could be done online. All 4 lines appeared on the screen. Mine at the top. Theirs underneath. I suspended my father's line. Then my mother's. Then Emily's. The website informed me suspended lines would lose calls, texts, and mobile data access until the account holder approved reactivation. Processing time. Up to 6 hours. My sister's brand new iPhone used the line I had just suspended. Sooner or later, she was going to realize the phone she'd spent all evening showing off couldn't connect to anything. I didn't smile. I didn't regret it either. I just moved to the next tab. I removed my parents and my sister from the shared iCloud plan next. The system warned me they'd lose extra storage within 48 hours unless they bought their own subscription. I clicked confirm. Family photos, backups, contacts, everything would stop syncing soon. I shut the laptop halfway and rubbed my eyes. One thing left, the internet. The Wi-Fi at my parents' house had been under my name for 3 years. My dad had asked me to sign for it after his old account got rejected over unpaid bills. At the time, he promised it would only be temporary, like everything else in that house. I logged into the provider account. The modem showed as active. 7 devices connected, the living room TV, my sister's gaming console, both of my parents' laptops, the new iPhone still connected through Wi-Fi, a wireless printer, one of those smart speakers my mom screamed at whenever it misunderstood her. I took another sip of tea, then changed the admin password, changed the Wi-Fi name, changed the Wi-Fi password too. Every device disappeared from the screen one by one. Disconnected, disconnected, disconnected. After that, I clicked temporarily suspend service. The website asked for a reason. I selected personal. A loading circle spun for 3 seconds. Then the modem status turned gray, inactive. At that exact moment, somebody in that house was probably complaining the Wi-Fi stopped working. Maybe my sister was trying to activate the new iPhone and wondering why nothing loaded. Maybe my dad was already yelling. Maybe my mother was blaming everyone except herself. I'd never know. And honestly, I didn't care enough to wonder for long. I closed the laptop, carried my mug to the sink, rinsed it, turned off the kitchen light. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and finally touched my cheek. Still warm. Not stinging anymore. Just sore. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I looked at the screen without picking it up. Mom. Then another message. The Wi-Fi isn't working. Another. Emily's phone won't connect. Another. What did you do? I turned the phone face down. For a few seconds, I sat there in silence, thinking about everything I'd done over the last hour. I didn't feel proud. Didn't feel guilty either. Mostly, I felt organized, like I'd finally cleaned a room that had been messy for years. I stood up again and walked back to the desk, opened the laptop one more time. This time, I emailed my apartment building manager. Good evening. Starting tomorrow, please do not release packages or mail addressed to me to anyone else, including family members. Thank you. I hit send. Then I opened my banking app. 2 credit cards connected to almost every automatic payment in my parents' house. I temporarily froze both. The app asked if I wanted replacement cards mailed out. I requested new ones. Then I manually canceled every recurring payment attached to the old cards, one by one. Electric bill, streaming services, insurance, memberships, delivery apps, done. When I finally closed the laptop for the second time, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful exactly, just empty. I changed into sweatpants, folded my sweater over the chair, set my shoes neatly beside the wall. Then I climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling. There was a thin crack in the corner above the window. Same crack I'd noticed the first night I moved in. My phone buzzed again, and again. I didn't check. I grabbed it, switched every setting to silent until morning, and dropped it back onto the nightstand. The screen went dark. I turned off the lamp. By the time I closed my eyes, the burning in my cheek was completely gone. The alarm went off at 7 the next morning. I got up immediately, made the bed, showered, made coffee, picked out a gray suit I hadn't worn in weeks. The mark on my face had faded into a light pink shadow by morning, but I still used extra concealer. It covered most of it. Good enough. Before leaving, I finally checked my phone. 19 missed calls, 34 texts. I ignored all of them. At the office, I arrived 10 minutes early like always. The floor was mostly empty except for the receptionist and my boss. Through the glass wall of her office, I could see Sandra talking on the phone with a frustrated look on her face. I sat down at my desk and opened the file she'd assigned me Friday afternoon. Westbridge Construction, LLC. 21 years in business. 3 primary partners. Several active projects. The bank financing their newest development had requested an outside review before renewing funding. I scrolled through the vendor list absent-mindedly while drinking coffee. Then I stopped. Harper Supply Services. Harper was my mother's maiden name. My uncle Dennis owned the company. The same uncle who kept eating dinner rolls while my mother slapped me across the face. I kept reading. A few lines lower, another name caught my attention. Coleman Concrete. Coleman was the last name of my father's longtime business partner. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Maybe it was coincidence. But it didn't feel like coincidence. Westbridge Construction was paying both companies regularly. Large payments. Repeated payments. I closed the file, opened it again, read the names one more time. Then Sandra tapped lightly on the glass wall and motioned for me to come into her office. You started the file already? Yeah. Problem? I sat down across from her desk and placed the folder in front of me. There are family connections. She frowned slightly. How close? One vendor belongs to my uncle. Another belongs to my dad's business partner. Do you need to step away from the case? I can if necessary. I'd rather disclose it now than have it become an issue later. Sandra studied me quietly for a moment. Then she opened a drawer and slid a disclosure form across the desk. Fill this out. But unless we find an actual conflict, stay on the file. I nodded. While I filled out the paperwork, she kept reading through the case notes. Then she spoke again without looking up. One more thing. The bank requested this review because they suspect inflated vendor billing. I stopped writing for half a second. Sandra noticed. If you find something, you report it exactly like any other case. No warnings, no favors. Understood? Understood. I signed the form. She signed underneath my name, then filed it away. Back at my desk, I reopened the case file and started from the beginning. Invoices, payment summaries, vendor history. I was halfway through the second year of records when reception called my extension around 11. There's a woman downstairs asking for you. Who? She says she's your aunt. My stomach tightened immediately. I took the elevator down to the lobby. Aunt Linda stood near the front entrance, still wearing the same coat from Christmas dinner. Her eyes looked swollen like she hadn't slept. We need to talk, she said quietly. Not here. I took her across the street to a small cafe. I ordered tea. She ordered nothing. The second we sat down, she leaned closer across the table. Your mother's losing her mind. I said nothing. Your father's screaming at everybody. Emily cried all night. Nothing in the house works. I stirred my tea slowly. The phones are off, she continued. The internet too. Your dad says what you did is illegal. It isn't. I know. That surprised me enough to look up. She glanced around before lowering her voice further. There's something else you should know. I waited. Your father's been taking money out of the company for months, maybe longer. I stayed completely still. The gifts last night? She whispered. He didn't pay for those himself. I felt my fingers tighten around the mug. How do you know? His business partner mentioned it back in October. He was angry. Said your father was putting everybody at risk, and now you're telling me because? Because you're the only person in that family who understands this kind of stuff. I let out a slow breath. Interesting timing. She flinched a little at that. I know. And last night, when she hit me, her eyes dropped to the table. I should have said something. But you didn't, no. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her purse and slid a folded piece of paper across the table, a phone number, and a name. Richard Coleman, my father's business partner. He wants to talk to you, she said quietly. I stared down at the paper. Why would he contact me? Because he's scared. She stood before I could answer, then paused beside the table. Do what you think is right, Hannah. After she left, I unfolded the paper again and stared at the number for a long time before sliding it into my coat pocket. Outside the cafe window, people walked past carrying shopping bags and leftover Christmas boxes like everything in the world was normal. Inside my chest, something felt very different. I went back to the office and tried to focus on the file in front of me. It didn't work. Every time I looked at the vendor list, I saw my father's face at the dinner table pretending not to notice what my mother had done. I saw my sister smiling over that new phone. I saw my uncle chewing bread while I stood there humiliated in front of everyone. By 6 that evening, most of the office had emptied out. Sandra walked past my desk on her way out and paused. You heading home soon? Probably another hour. She nodded toward the file open on my monitor. Don't drown yourself in it tonight. I won't. But I already had. The second she left, I pulled the folded paper from my coat pocket and stared at the number again. Richard Coleman. My father talked about him constantly growing up. Richard said this. Richard approved that. Richard thought the market would shift next quarter. I'd heard his name at dinner tables for almost 15 years. I never thought he'd end up contacting me directly. I picked up my phone before I could overthink it and typed a short message. This is Hannah Parker. My aunt gave me your number. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Can we meet tomorrow? Lunch, public place. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then typed back, fine. He sent the restaurant address 2 minutes later, an old steakhouse downtown, 1:30 p.m. I locked my phone and went back to work. Around 8:30, I finally shut my computer down and headed home. The apartment felt colder than usual when I walked inside. I heated leftover pasta in the microwave and ate standing at the kitchen counter while checking emails on my phone. Halfway through dinner, my screen lit up again. Emily. The first message from her since Christmas dinner. Please answer me. Then another. I didn't know about the money. I stared at the words for a long time, then locked the phone without replying. I barely slept that night, not because I felt guilty, because my brain wouldn't shut off. At 7 the next morning, I was already dressed and drinking coffee before sunrise. By noon, I'd reviewed enough financial records to realize the billing issues weren't random. The numbers followed patterns. Repeated patterns, vendor charges higher than market rates, payments split strangely across months, expenses that made no sense, nothing dramatic enough to immediately trigger alarms, but enough to feel wrong. At 1:15, I grabbed my coat and headed downtown. Richard Coleman was already seated when I walked into the restaurant. Late 50s, heavy-set, expensive watch, loosened tie. He stood when he saw me approaching. Hannah, Mr. Coleman. Richard's fine. I sat across from him. The waiter came over immediately, but Richard ordered without even opening the menu. Steak, mineral water. I ordered the same mostly because I didn't care enough to think about food. The waiter walked away. Richard folded his hands together and leaned forward slightly. I'm gonna be honest with you from the start, he said quietly. I'm not some innocent man. I said nothing. I've done plenty over the years I'm not proud of, but your father crossed lines that put all of us in danger. My stomach tightened. How bad? He looked around first to make sure nobody nearby could hear. Over the last 18 months, your father's been pulling company money for personal spending. I stayed completely still. Cars, gifts, trips, cash transfers disguised as consulting fees. The restaurant suddenly felt warmer. Consulting fees to who? He hesitated. Your mother. Your sister, too. I blinked slowly. My sister? She's been receiving monthly payments for almost 3 years. I leaned back in the booth. For a second, I genuinely wondered if Emily even knew. Then I remembered the way she spent money. The shopping bags, the constant packages, the expensive gym membership she somehow afforded despite never keeping a job longer than 4 months. Maybe she knew. Maybe she never asked. Richard lowered his voice further. Your father thought nobody would look too closely because the bank trusted us. Then the outside review landed in your office. That wasn't intentional. I know, he paused. That might actually save you. The waiter returned with water. Neither of us touched it. Richard reached into a leather folder beside him and slid a thick envelope across the table. I brought copies. I looked down at it but didn't touch it yet. If these are real, I said carefully, they need to go through official channels. They will. You can't send things to my personal email. You can't hand me documents privately and expect me to ignore procedure. A faint smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. You really are different from your father. I ignored that. If you cooperate formally, it gets documented. That matters. That's exactly why I contacted you. I finally picked up the envelope. Inside were copies of invoices, bank transfers, and payment summaries. Enough paperwork to make my chest feel heavy after only 30 seconds. Richard watched my expression carefully. I'm trying to protect myself, he admitted. I won't lie about that. At least that's honest. He nodded once. One more thing. Your father's going to find out we met. I figured. This city's smaller than people think. I took a sip of water. My mother's already called me 40 times in 2 days. I'm not really worried about another angry phone call. For the first time since I sat down, Richard almost smiled, but it disappeared quickly. I knew your mother when we were young, he said quietly. I immediately regretted letting the conversation drift personal. She always favored your sister. I looked up sharply. He continued before I could stop him. She never hid it either. I set my glass down harder than intended. Stick to the business side, Richard. His expression changed immediately. Fair enough. The food arrived a few minutes later. Neither of us talked much while eating. By the end of lunch, I already knew this situation was bigger than I originally thought. When we stepped outside the restaurant afterward, cold wind hit us both at once. Richard adjusted his coat. I'll send everything formally tonight. Good. Then he looked at me one last time before heading toward the curb. For what it's worth, he said quietly, none of this started because of you. I didn't answer. I watched him get into his SUV and drive away. Then I stood there alone on the sidewalk for almost a full minute before finally walking back toward the office. On the way, I stopped inside a pharmacy and bought stronger concealer. The mark on my cheek still showed under bright lighting. Back at work, Sandra looked up the second I entered her office. How'd lunch go? One of the vendors wants to cooperate. That got her attention immediately. How cooperative? He brought documentation. Sandra sat back slowly. That fast? He's scared. Good. Fear makes people honest. I handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully and skimmed the first few pages. Her expression hardened almost immediately. Jesus. Yeah. She closed the folder. We process this formally. Tonight. By 7:30, the office was nearly empty except for me, Sandra, and someone from legal. The documents confirmed everything Richard claimed, and added more. Bank transfers, personal expenses, payments labeled as consulting fees sent directly to accounts connected to my mother and sister. I stared at Emily's name on the screen longer than I should have. Sandra noticed. You okay? Honestly? I don't know. She nodded slowly, like that answer made perfect sense. Around 9, I finally left the office. The second I stepped outside, my phone started vibrating again. Mom, ignored. Dad, ignored. Emily, ignored. Then, one final text from my mother. Your father says you're destroying this family. I stared at the message while waiting for the crosswalk light, then slipped my phone back into my pocket. No, I wasn't destroying the family. I was just the first person who stopped pretending nothing was wrong. The next morning, the bank officially requested additional records. By noon, the entire atmosphere in the office had changed. People weren't saying much directly to me, but I could feel it. Sandra kept her office door closed most of the morning. Legal walked in and out twice. Compliance requested copies of every supporting document, and my father called me 6 more times before 10:30. I ignored everyone. Around 11, reception transferred a call to my desk. Your father is downstairs. My fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. He says he won't leave. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Did he come up? No. Security stopped him in the lobby. Good. I closed my eyes for 1 second before answering. Tell security not to send him up. The receptionist lowered her voice. He looks angry. That's not new. I hung up and stared at the spreadsheet on my monitor without actually seeing it. A minute later, Sandra appeared beside my desk. He's downstairs? Apparently. You want me to handle it? I almost said yes, but something stopped me. No, I'll go. Sandra studied my face carefully. If he raises his voice once, you walk away. I know. And Hannah? Yeah? You don't owe anybody a private conversation. I nodded once and headed toward the elevator. The lobby was quieter than usual when the doors opened. My father stood near the front entrance, pacing beside the windows. The second he saw me, he stopped moving. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked older than he had 4 days earlier at Christmas dinner. Wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tense. Hannah, what are you doing here? We need to talk. Then you should have called before showing up at my job. I did call. 31 times. His expression tightened immediately. You shut off the phones. Yes. The internet too. Yes. Your mother's losing her mind. I crossed my arms. That sounds exhausting. He stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to yell or beg. Finally, he stepped closer. You're humiliating us. I almost laughed at that. Humiliating you? You froze the cards. Emily can't even use her phone. Emily's 24 years old. She can pay her own bill. That's not the point. No, I said quietly. The point is that none of you expected me to stop paying for everything. A few people in the lobby were pretending not to listen. My father lowered his voice slightly. Whatever problem you have with your mother, this has gone too far. I looked directly at him. Did it go too far before or after you used company money to buy Emily's car? The color drained from his face so fast it almost shocked me. For 2 full seconds, he said absolutely nothing. That told me everything. You don't know what you're talking about, he finally muttered. Then you shouldn't have panicked when I mentioned it. His jaw clenched. Who's feeding you information? I work in auditing, Dad. People don't need to feed me information. They hand me numbers, and the numbers speak for themselves. Hannah? You used company money for personal expenses. It's more complicated than that. It always is. He ran a hand through his hair. You think you understand how businesses work because you sit behind a desk all day looking at spreadsheets? No, I said calmly. I understand because hiding money leaves patterns. That hit him harder than yelling would have. He looked around the lobby quickly, like suddenly realizing where he was. Then his voice dropped lower. You're going to destroy this family over one stupid fight. It wasn't one fight. It was a slap. It was 26 years of knowing Emily mattered more. His face hardened immediately. That's ridiculous. Is it, Hannah? She got an iPhone, a designer bag, diamonds, and a car paid for with money that wasn't even yours. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. Silence stretched between us. Then he tried a different approach. You think your mother wanted things to end up like this? I stared at him. She hit me in front of the entire family and nobody said a word. She was emotional. So was I. That doesn't justify what you're doing now. I almost laughed again. What I'm doing? Yes. You mean my job? His eyes narrowed. You're enjoying this. That one actually hurt a little. Because part of me wondered if maybe I was enjoying finally seeing consequences hit people who never expected any. But mostly I was just tired. I didn't create the numbers, Dad. He stepped even closer. You could still stop this. No, you haven't filed the final report yet. My stomach tightened slightly, so he knew more than he should already. How do you know that? He ignored the question. You can step away from the case. The conflict disclosure was filed on day 1. You can still request reassignment. And explain why? Because my father misused company funds? His expression cracked for the first time. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. You don't understand what happens if this goes public. Then maybe you should have thought about that before paying Mom and Emily fake consulting fees. That did it. He looked like I'd slapped him back. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered him staring at his dinner plate while my mother hit me across the face. He lowered his voice again. Emily didn't know. I believe that. That surprised him. She thought it was allowance money. She's an adult. I know. Then help her. I already did. His forehead creased. What? I told her to get her own lawyer. You talked to her? She found me yesterday. He looked exhausted suddenly. Older. Smaller somehow. She's terrified. So am I. That seemed to catch him off guard. I continued before he could answer. You think this is easy for me? Hannah, I haven't slept properly in days. I walk into work every morning knowing my own family's names are sitting inside an investigation file. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because there wasn't really anything he could say. Finally, he looked away toward the windows. When you were little, he said quietly. You used to follow me around everywhere. I stayed silent. You thought I could fix anything. Something heavy twisted in my chest. I used to think that too. The lobby went quiet around us. Then my father looked back at me one final time. If this goes forward, he said softly, your mother will never forgive you. I held his stare. She already didn't. He stood there for another second like maybe he expected me to change my mind at the last moment. I didn't. Eventually, he nodded once. Small, defeated. Then he turned and walked toward the exit without another word. I watched him leave through the glass doors. The moment he disappeared outside, I realized my hands were shaking. Sandra was standing near the elevator when I turned around. She must have come downstairs halfway through the conversation. You okay? Yeah, that was a lie, but it was the easiest answer. Sandra glanced toward the doors where my father had disappeared. Want the rest of the day off? No. You sure? If I go home right now, I'll just sit there thinking. She nodded slowly. Then come back upstairs. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Back at my desk, I opened the case file again. For a while, I just stared at the screen. Then my email notification popped up. New message from compliance. Urgent review request. Attached were additional banking records. I opened them slowly, and within 30 seconds, my stomach dropped. There were monthly transfers going into an account under Emily's name for almost 3 years. Regular amounts, consistent dates, enough money to explain every expensive thing she'd owned lately. I leaned back hard in my chair. Sandra looked over immediately. What? I turned the monitor slightly toward her. She scanned the transfers silently, then exhaled through her nose. That's bad. She probably thought it was allowance money. Maybe, Sandra said carefully, but legally that may not matter much. I closed my eyes briefly. For the first time since this whole thing started, I genuinely felt sick, not because of my father, because Emily was about to get dragged into something she probably never fully understood. And somehow, despite everything, I still didn't want that for her. Sandra sent me home early that night anyway, not because she ordered me to leave. Because around 6:30, she walked past my desk, took one look at my face, and quietly said, "You're done for today." I didn't argue. By the time I got back to my apartment, my entire body felt heavy, the kind of exhaustion that sits behind your eyes. I dropped my bag near the couch and stood in the kitchen staring at nothing for almost a full minute before realizing I hadn't eaten all day. I made instant noodles because it was the only thing in the apartment that didn't require effort. While the water boiled, my phone buzzed again. Emily. This time I answered. Not the call, just the message. What? 3 dots appeared immediately. Can we meet tomorrow? I stared at the screen, then typed, why? A minute passed before she answered. Because Dad told me everything. That made my stomach tighten instantly. I leaned against the counter while waiting for the next message. He said the money came from the company. Another pause. I really didn't know. The noodles finished cooking while I stood there reading those words over and over. Finally, I typed back, tomorrow, lunch, public place. She sent a thumbs up. That was it. I ate dinner on the couch in silence with the TV running low in the background. I couldn't focus on anything. Not the show, not my phone, not even my own thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily sitting at the Christmas table opening gifts while I sat there empty-handed. Then I saw her as a kid following me around the mall, begging me to braid her hair because Mom never learned how. Those two versions of her kept crashing together in my head. I barely slept again. The next morning, Emily was already waiting outside the cafe when I arrived. No makeup, hair tied back messily, oversized sweatshirt, and for the first time in years, she actually looked her age instead of somebody trying to act older. She stood the second she saw me. Hey. Hey. We sat near the window. Neither of us touched the menus. Emily looked exhausted. Not dramatic, not fake. Actually exhausted. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table for the first 30 seconds. Then she finally spoke. Dad told me about the money. I stayed quiet. He said it wasn't stealing. That's convenient. Her face tightened slightly. I'm serious, Hannah. So am I. She swallowed hard. I thought he was helping me. With what? Life. I almost laughed at that, but stopped myself. Emily rushed to continue. He said he wanted me to focus on figuring out what I wanted to do. He said the money came from investments. And you believe that? Yes. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. No defensiveness, no attitude, just embarrassment. She rubbed her hands together nervously. I know how stupid that sounds now. I leaned back slightly. Did you ever wonder why Mom and Dad could suddenly afford everything? Her eyes dropped again. I didn't think about it. That's part of the problem. She nodded once, quietly. A waitress stopped by to take our order. Coffee for Emily, tea for me. The second the waitress walked away, Emily spoke again. Am I in legal trouble? Straight to the point. I appreciated that. I don't know yet. Her breathing changed immediately. But, I added carefully, if they believe you genuinely didn't know where the money came from, that matters. How do I prove that? You get your own lawyer. Her shoulders slumped. Dad says lawyers make people panic. Dad's not exactly giving great advice lately. That almost made her smile. Almost. Instead, she looked out the window. The card stopped working yesterday, she said quietly. Mom lost it. I stayed silent. She screamed at Dad for like an hour. How unusual. Emily ignored that. She keeps saying this is all your fault. I looked directly at her. And what do you think? Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again, because we both already knew the answer. After a few seconds, she whispered, I think none of this would have happened if they treated you better. That hit harder than I expected. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was probably the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in years. The waitress brought our drinks. Emily wrapped both hands around her coffee cup immediately like she was cold. I keep replaying Christmas dinner in my head, she admitted quietly. You were just sitting there. I stared into my tea. You looked so embarrassed. I was, she swallowed hard. And I kept opening presents. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Emily laughed once under her breath. I looked like an idiot. I finally looked up at her. You weren't the biggest idiot at that table. That almost made her cry. Her eyes turned glossy immediately. I really didn't know about the company money. I believe you. You do? Yes. That surprised her enough that she sat back slightly. Then why won't you help Dad? Because that was the difference between us. Emily still thought this was fixable if somebody just loved the family hard enough. I used to think that too. Because Dad knew, I said quietly. She stared at me silently, and Mom knew. Emily looked back down at her coffee. I think Mom always thought you'd stay no matter what. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. She was wrong. Emily nodded slowly. She's really bad right now. What does that mean? She barely leaves the bedroom. I didn't answer. She keeps saying she didn't mean to hit you. That doesn't actually change anything. I know. Another silence. Then Emily spoke again. Dad cried yesterday. That surprised me more than it should have. My entire life, she said softly. I think I've seen Dad cry maybe twice. I looked out the window. People crossing the street, cars moving. Normal life continuing while mine felt like it had exploded in 4 days. He said he ruined everything. For a second, I almost felt bad for him again. Then I remembered him sitting silently at the table while my mother slapped me, and the feeling disappeared. Emily finally pulled her phone from her pocket, not the expensive iPhone anymore. A cheap, older Android. The other phone stopped working completely. Yeah. I bought this myself yesterday. Good. I got a job interview too. That surprised me enough to look at her again. Where? Car dealership reception desk. That's actually decent. I know. A tiny smile appeared on her face for half a second, then disappeared again. I think this is the first time I've ever actually been scared about money. I stirred my tea slowly. Most people are. She nodded quietly. I never understood why you got so stressed all the time. That almost made me laugh. I was paying for half the house, Emily. I know that now. I studied her carefully across the table. For the first time in years, she didn't look spoiled. She just looked young and overwhelmed. Finally, she asked the question I knew was coming. Do you hate me? The cafe suddenly felt very quiet. I thought about every birthday, every holiday, every moment she got chosen first while I stood there pretending not to care. Then I thought about her sitting here now with cheap coffee and scared eyes. No, I said honestly. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. But I resented you for a long time. Emily nodded like she expected that answer. I probably deserved it. Sometimes, a tiny sad smile crossed her face. That's fair. We stayed another 20 minutes after that talking about smaller things. Lawyers, jobs, what would happen next. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. When we finally stood to leave, Emily hesitated outside the cafe, then then quietly asked, "Can I text you sometimes?" I slid my hands into my coat pockets. "You can." "You probably won't answer." "Not always," she nodded slowly. "That's fair too." Then she surprised me by stepping forward and hugging me quickly. Awkward, brief, almost nervous, but real. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet. Mom was wrong, by the way. About what? She always acted like people loved me more because I was easier to love. Something inside my chest tightened painfully. Emily looked down for a second before continuing. "But honestly, you were always the stronger one." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. She gave me one last small smile before walking toward the bus stop alone. And for the first time since Christmas dinner, I stood there wondering if maybe losing my family wasn't going to happen all at once. Maybe it would happen one person at a time. 3 days later, the bank froze several company accounts. Everything moved fast after that. Too fast. By Thursday morning, legal teams were involved officially. Compliance scheduled emergency meetings. Sandra barely left her office, and my father stopped calling altogether. That silence bothered me more than the yelling had. At 11, Sandra walked over carrying 2 folders and dropped them onto my desk. "The preliminary report goes out tomorrow morning." I looked up at her. "That fast? The bank doesn't want delays." She lowered her voice slightly, and honestly, neither do I. I opened the folders slowly. Inside were final summaries, transaction breakdowns, interview notes, vendor records, and transfer histories. Enough paper to destroy several lives. Sandra crossed her arms. "You still okay staying on this?" "Yes." That answer came automatically, maybe too automatically. She studied me for another second. "If that changes, tell me before the final submission." I nodded. She walked away. I stared at the folders for almost a full minute before opening the first one. By 4 that afternoon, I'd stopped seeing the numbers as numbers. Now they felt personal. The luxury SUV my sister drove, the vacations, the shopping sprees, even Christmas dinner. Every expensive thing suddenly had fingerprints on it, and underneath all of it sat my father's name. At 5:30, my phone buzzed. "Mom," ignored. Then another message came through immediately after. "Please come home." I stared at the screen. Another message followed. "Your father isn't okay." Then another. "Please." I locked the phone without answering. 10 minutes later, Sandra appeared beside my desk again. "You're pale." "I'm fine." That's not convincing anymore. I rubbed my eyes. "My mother wants me to come over." Sandra's expression changed instantly. "Absolutely not." I wasn't planning to. Good. She leaned one hand against my desk. "Hannah, listen to me carefully. Families get weird when money and investigations collide. Do not walk into that house alone." "I know." "I'm serious. So am I." She stayed there another second like she wanted to say more, then finally nodded and walked away. At 7:30, I finally shut down my computer and headed home. The second I stepped inside my apartment, my phone rang again. "Dad." I stared at it. For some reason, this time I answered. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then his voice came through low and rough. "Your mother took sleeping pills." Every muscle in my body tightened. "What?" "She's okay," he said quickly. It wasn't like that. She just mixed too many with wine." I leaned against the kitchen counter hard enough that it hurt. "Is she at the hospital?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. "Why are you telling me?" "Because she keeps asking for you." I let out a slow breath. Machines beeped faintly somewhere behind him. "She needs a therapist, Dad. Not me. That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "What wasn't fair was spending 26 years pretending your family was normal." Silence. Then his voice cracked slightly. "I know I failed you." That hit harder than I expected. Not because it fixed anything, because it was the first time either parent had ever admitted it. I stayed quiet. "She keeps saying she didn't realize how bad things got." I laughed once under my breath. "Mom knew exactly what she was doing. She grew up in a house where people treated love differently. That's not an excuse." "No," he admitted softly. "It's not." I slid down slowly until I was sitting on the kitchen floor. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet. "I can't fix this for you," I whispered. "I know." Another pause. Then he spoke again. "The bank suspended me today." I closed my eyes tighter. I figured. "They're talking about criminal charges." I said nothing. "Hannah, what?" If they arrest me, his voice broke completely that time. Please don't let Emily think I'm a monster. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Because that was the worst part about all of this. He wasn't a monster. Monsters are easy. My father was weak, selfish, proud, careless, but not evil, and somehow that made everything harder. She already knows you love her, I said quietly. That's not what I asked. I swallowed hard. You should have loved both of us better. The silence after that lasted several seconds. Then I heard him breathing shakily through the phone. You sound like your grandmother when you're angry. That almost made me smile despite myself. Almost. She used to scare you too, I muttered. A weak laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Yeah. Then silence again. Finally, he spoke one last time. I'm tired, Hannah. I stared at the dark kitchen window. So am I. Neither of us hung up right away, but eventually the line disconnected quietly on its own. I stayed sitting on the kitchen floor for a long time afterward. The microwave clock glowed 8:14 in green numbers across the room. Outside, somebody honked in traffic. Normal sounds. Normal night. Nothing about my life felt normal anymore. My phone buzzed again 15 minutes later. Emily. Mom's asking for you. I typed back before I could rethink it. I'm not coming tonight. A minute later. Okay. Then another message appeared. I understand. That one hurt more than the others. The next morning, the final report went out at 9:12 a.m. 47 pages, 3 appendices, dozens of supporting records. Sandra submitted it directly to the bank and copied legal compliance on everything. By 11, rumors had spread through half the office already. Nobody asked me questions directly. But people looked at me differently, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some like they were trying to imagine what it would feel like to investigate your own father. At 2 in the afternoon, Sandra closed my office door behind her and sat across from me. The bank escalated it. I already knew what that meant. Formal investigation? She nodded once. And because federal financing was involved in one of the developments, it may go beyond civil penalties. I looked down at my desk. For some reason, the first thing I noticed was a coffee stain near my keyboard. Tiny, brown, old, something completely meaningless. Sandra watched me carefully. You can take leave if you need to. No. Hannah, if I stop moving right now, I think I'll fall apart. That answer seemed honest enough for her. She nodded slowly. Then keep moving. At 4:30, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then answered. Miss Parker? Yes? This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your mother is asking to see you before discharge. I closed my eyes immediately. We can't advise you personally, the nurse continued gently, but emotionally she seems very distressed. Distressed. Such a clean word for a lifetime of damage. I'll think about it, I said quietly. After hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes. Then Sandra knocked lightly on the open office door. You okay? My mother wants me to visit her at the hospital. Sandra exhaled slowly. You want my honest opinion? Yes. Go only if you're prepared for her to make herself the victim. That sounded exactly like my mother. And somehow, hearing someone else say it made my chest ache. I looked down at my phone again, then at the window beside my desk, then back at Sandra. I don't know what kind of daughter this makes me. Sandra's expression softened slightly, the kind that finally got tired of bleeding for people who never noticed you were hurt. I looked away immediately after that because suddenly my eyes burned, and for the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt dangerously close to crying. I didn't go to the hospital that night. I told myself it was because I was tired, because I needed space. Because nothing good would come from seeing my mother hooked to monitors while she cried and blamed everyone except herself. But deep down, the real reason was simpler. I wasn't ready to look at her yet. So instead, I went home. Fed myself frozen pizza because I didn't have the energy to cook. Took a shower. Sat on the couch in sweatpants with the TV running quietly in the background, while my phone buzzed every 20 minutes with updates from family members I barely wanted to hear from anymore. Around 9:30, Emily texted me again. Mom keeps asking if you hate her. I stared at the message for a long time, then finally answered, I don't know. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then appeared again. I think she hates herself right now. That message stayed in my head the rest of the night. The next morning I woke up to rain hitting the bedroom window. Gray sky. Cold apartment. For a second, before my brain fully caught up, I forgot everything. Then my phone lit up, and reality came back immediately. 3 missed calls from Dad, 1 email from legal, 2 messages from Sandra. I sat up slowly and checked the first message from Sandra. Need you in early. Bank escalated again. Perfect. By 8:15, I was already sitting in the conference room at work, surrounded by documents and coffee cups. Sandra stood near the screen at the front, while two people from compliance reviewed timelines. I barely spoke during the meeting. Mostly I listened. The investigation had expanded beyond vendor inflation now. They were reviewing tax filings, expense reimbursements, corporate cards, everything. At one point, one of the compliance officers asked casually, "Any indication family members knowingly benefited?" My stomach tightened instantly. Sandra answered before I could. The younger daughter appears financially dependent, but likely uninformed regarding the source of funds. Likely uninformed. Such clinical language for someone who used to steal my sweaters in high school and cry during dog commercials. The meeting finally ended after almost 2 hours. As people started leaving the room, Sandra touched my arm lightly. "Stay a second." I sat back down. The second the door closed, she sighed. "You need boundaries." "I know. No, Hannah. I mean real ones." I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "My mother's at the hospital, I heard. She wants to see me." Sandra crossed her arms. "And do you want to see her?" That should have been an easy question. It wasn't. "I don't know." Sandra nodded slowly, like she expected that answer. "Then don't go out of guilt." I looked down at the table. "She's still my mother. And you're still her daughter. Funny how only one of you spent years acting like it." That one stung. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. I left work around 6. The rain had stopped by then, but the streets still looked wet under the lights. Halfway to my apartment, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and just sat there with the engine running. I don't even know why. Maybe because going home meant being alone with my thoughts again. Eventually, my phone buzzed. "Emily," I answered this time. "She's awake," Emily said immediately. No hello, no small talk. "How is she?" "Tired." I leaned back in the driver's seat. "She asked about you again." I closed my eyes briefly. "Emily, she cried when I said you probably weren't coming." My chest tightened painfully. Then Emily lowered her voice. "I think she finally realizes you can actually leave." That sentence hit harder than anything else, because my entire life, my mother acted like I would always stay, always forgive, always keep the peace, always keep paying. And maybe she believed that because I'd spent 26 years proving her right. Until Christmas. Until the slap. "I can't do this tonight," I whispered. Emily stayed quiet for a second, then softly said, "Okay?" Before hanging up, she added one more thing. "Dad's drinking a lot." That worried me more than I wanted to admit. After the call ended, I drove home in silence. The apartment felt especially empty that night. I changed clothes, made tea, sat on the couch, and around 11:30, my phone rang again. Dad. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered quietly. "Yeah?" For a second, all I heard was breathing. Then my father spoke. "I sold the Mercedes today." I frowned slightly. "What?" "The dealership bought it back." My sister's SUV, the one he'd bought 6 months earlier, the one my mother spent weeks bragging about online. I used the money to pay part of the outstanding balances. I stayed silent. I should have done this sooner. Yes, he should have. But saying it out loud suddenly felt pointless. My father sounded exhausted. Not angry anymore, just hollow. "Your mother's asleep," he continued quietly. "The doctor says she needs treatment for anxiety and depression." I leaned my head back against the couch. "Okay." Another silence. Then he asked something that caught me completely off guard. "Did you ever hate me growing up?" I blinked. No. "Even after everything?" I thought carefully before answering. "I think I spent more time wanting you to notice me." The line stayed silent for several seconds. Then my father inhaled shakily. "I noticed you." I laughed softly under my breath before I could stop myself. "No, you didn't." That hurt him. I could hear it immediately. I tried. "You watched Mom choose Emily every single time. She was easier with your mother." "And I wasn't." "No," he admitted quietly. "You challenged her." That made something cold settle in my stomach. Because it was true. Emily avoided conflict. I asked questions. Emily apologized quickly. I pushed back. My mother loved obedience more than affection. And suddenly my entire childhood made even more sense. "I failed both of you," Dad whispered. I stared at the dark TV screen across from me. "Maybe." Another long silence. Then he spoke again. "The lawyers think there'll be a plea agreement. I closed my eyes. So it's serious? Yes. My father sounded older than I'd ever heard him before. They may take the house. I looked around my apartment slowly. The small kitchen, the cheap lamp beside the couch, the shelves I built myself because I couldn't afford better furniture when I moved in. And for the first time in my life, I realized I felt safer here than I ever did growing up. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. Not polished, not defensive, just tired. Real. And somehow that made it worse, because I'd wanted that apology for years. Now it arrived after everything was already destroyed. I swallowed hard. I know. Neither of us said goodbye when the call ended. The line just went quiet. The following Monday, the official investigation became public. Someone leaked it to local news. By lunchtime, people in the office were pretending not to read articles about my father online. Sandra shut her office door most of the afternoon to keep reporters from calling reception constantly. At 3, she walked over and dropped a printed article onto my desk. Local business executive under investigation for misuse of corporate funds. My father's name sat in bold letters near the center. I stared at it silently. You okay? Sandra asked carefully. No. That answer surprised both of us. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I stopped pretending I was handling everything perfectly. Sandra pulled the chair beside my desk out slightly and sat down. You know something most people don't? I looked at her tiredly. You can love someone and still admit they destroyed themselves. My throat tightened instantly. Sandra continued softly. Those things can exist together. I looked back at the article, at my father's name, at the company logo underneath it, then quietly asked the question I'd been avoiding for days. What if this becomes the only thing people remember about him? Sandra didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, then that's on him. Not you. I looked down at my hands, still shaking slightly, still tired, still angry. But underneath all of it now sat something new. Grief. Real grief, not just for the family I lost, for the family I kept pretending I had. 2 weeks after the article came out, federal investigators officially froze my father's remaining company access. By then, everybody already knew. Neighbors, former co-workers, people my parents hadn't spoken to in years suddenly texting pretending they cared. My mother stopped leaving the apartment almost completely. Emily told me she kept the curtains closed all day now. Dad moved through the situation differently. Quieter, less yelling, less blaming. Almost like reality had finally exhausted him. I was at work reviewing another client file when Sandra knocked lightly against my office door. You free for a second? Yeah. She stepped inside carrying a folder. The prosecutor's office scheduled your statement for Thursday. I nodded slowly. I figured. They'll ask about family relationships too. That part made my stomach tighten. Not the financial questions, the personal ones. Sandra sat down across from me. You don't have to protect anyone anymore, Hannah. I looked down at the folder. I know, but knowing and doing were different things. Thursday came faster than I expected. The prosecutor's office was colder than I imagined. Gray walls, cheap coffee smell, too bright. I sat beside a legal representative from the firm while answering questions for almost 3 hours. Dates, documents, transfers, who knew what, who had access to which accounts. At one point, the prosecutor leaned back slightly and asked, Do you believe your sister understood the origin of the funds? I thought about Emily sitting across from me in that cafe holding a cheap coffee cup with both hands because she was nervous. Then I answered honestly. No, the prosecutor wrote something down. And your mother? That answer came easier. Yes. Another note. By the time I left the building, my head hurt. Outside, rain had started again. I stood under the awning for a minute before pulling out my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom. None from Dad. 1 text from Emily. How did it go? I typed back. Long. Then added, You'll probably be okay. Her response came almost instantly. Thank you. That thank you stayed with me longer than it should have. The following Monday, formal charges were announced. Fraud, misuse of corporate funds, tax violations. The words looked unreal, printed across legal documents carrying my father's name. Sandra closed my office door that afternoon and sat across from me quietly. He's probably going to take a plea. I know. You okay? I stared out the window beside my desk. Cars moving through downtown traffic. People carrying coffees. Normal life continuing. No, I admitted honestly. Sandra nodded once. That's probably healthier than pretending you are. I laughed weakly under my breath. Maybe. She hesitated before speaking again. One more thing. I looked up. The bank approved your promotion. That surprised me enough to blink. What? You're moving to senior review next quarter. For a second, I genuinely didn't know what to say. After everything that happened, work had become survival mode. I forgot promotions even existed. Sandra gave me a small smile. You earned it before all this happened. Something in my chest tightened unexpectedly, because for the first time in weeks, somebody was talking to me like my entire identity wasn't tied to my family disaster. Thank you, I said quietly. You should celebrate eventually. Eventually. A month later, my parents officially sold the house. Emily told me over coffee. We'd started meeting every couple weeks after work, not because everything was magically fixed, because slowly, awkwardly, we were learning how to talk like actual people instead of competitors. They moved into an apartment near Westwood, she said while stirring sugar into her coffee. How's Mom? Emily exhaled slowly. Better some days. And Dad? He barely talks anymore. That image hurt more than I expected. My father had always filled rooms, even when he was wrong, even when he was pretending. Silence didn't fit him. Emily glanced at me carefully. He asks about you. I looked down at my tea. What do you tell him? The truth. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That you're angry. But not cruel. That almost made me smile. Almost. Emily leaned back in her chair. I got the dealership job, by the way. You did? Full-time. That's good. And... She hesitated slightly. I started paying back part of the money. I nodded slowly. That's also good. It's weird earning my own paycheck. I laughed softly. Most people start that experience at 16. She rolled her eyes a little. I know, but there was no attitude behind it this time. Just embarrassment. Emily stared out the cafe window quietly for a second before speaking again. I used to think Mom loved me more because I was special. I stayed silent. Now I think she loved me more because I never challenged her. That hit too close to home. She wanted someone easy, Emily continued quietly. You scared her. I thought about my mother my entire childhood. Every argument, every disappointed look, every time she acted like my independence was some kind of betrayal. Maybe Emily was right. The realization didn't make me feel better, just sad. 2 months later, my father officially accepted a plea agreement, reduced sentencing, financial repayment, permanent removal from executive business management, no prison time as long as he complied fully. When Emily told me, we were sitting on a bench outside her apartment building. She looked relieved. I thought they were going to take him away. So did he. She looked down at her hands. He cried after the hearing. I stared across the parking lot silently. Then Emily added quietly, Mom cried too. That surprised me less. My mother cried when consequences finally became real. But Dad crying? That still felt strange. Emily nudged my shoulder lightly. He asked if maybe one day you'd talk to him. I let out a slow breath. Maybe one day? That was the most honest answer I had. By spring, life finally started feeling different. Not fixed, just quieter. I moved into a bigger apartment across town. 2 bedrooms, small balcony, better light in the mornings. The first thing I bought for it was a dog from a local rescue shelter. 3-year-old mutt. Brown ears, crooked tail. The shelter paperwork said his name was Mason, but I renamed him Sunday because he looked too lazy to belong to any other day of the week. He followed me room to room constantly. The first night he fell asleep with his head resting against my foot, I cried for the first time in months. Not dramatic crying. Just quiet tears in the dark while a dog snored beside me. Work got better too. Sandra started assigning me larger clients. People trusted me more after the investigation. Ironically, exposing my father's lies made my professional reputation stronger. Life's weird like that. My Aunt Linda started visiting on Saturdays sometimes. She'd bring homemade cookies and gossip about neighbors. We almost never talked about my mother anymore. One afternoon, while Sunday slept beside the couch, I finally asked her something that had bothered me for months. Why are you still trying with me? Linda looked surprised. What do you mean? You stayed close after everything. She thought about it for a second, then shrugged lightly. Because you still treated me like family even when you were hurting. Simple answer. But real. Around 6 months after Christmas dinner, Emily asked to meet again. Different cafe this time. She arrived wearing office clothes from work and carrying a cheap laptop bag. No designer purse, no expensive jewelry, no fake confidence, just Emily. She smiled awkwardly while sitting down. You know what's weird? What? I'm happier now. That surprised me enough to laugh softly. You're buried in debt repayment. I know. You work full-time. I know. You take the bus. I definitely know. We both laughed quietly. Then Emily looked down at her coffee cup. But for the first time in my life, I actually know what belongs to me. That stayed in my head long after she said it. Before leaving, she hesitated near the sidewalk, then quietly asked, "Do you think Mom will ever change?" I thought carefully before answering. I think losing control changed her. That's not the same thing. No, I admitted softly. It's not. Emily nodded slowly, then hugged me goodbye before heading toward the bus stop. I watched her walk away for a minute before turning toward home. When I got back to my apartment, Sunday was waiting by the door holding one of my socks in his mouth like he'd accomplished something incredible. I scratched behind his ears while he wagged his tail hard enough to hit the wall. Then I looked around my apartment. The framed pictures, the quiet kitchen, the signed lease with only my name on it. No screaming, no favoritism, no pretending, just peace. Real peace. That night, before bed, I checked my calendar for the next morning. Client meeting at 9, lunch with Sandra at noon, vet appointment for Sunday on Wednesday. Normal things. Healthy things. I turned off the light and climbed into bed while Sunday curled up near my feet, and for the first time in years, I went to sleep without feeling like I owed my entire existence to somebody else.